Quadrant 4, Holistic and Comparative Lessons, is this last quadrant of the framework for culturally responsive and relevant music teaching. And I'm just going to put the chat box on the side here. Okay, now we're all ready. So let's take a look again at the quadrant here. We started over at teacher competence yesterday, teacher competencies with Liz, and then Jason talked with you about informed choices. Liz and Chrissy talked about authenticity just earlier, and so here we come kind of full circle at holistic and comparative lessons. Although I should remind you that you don't necessarily start at one point, right? You start anywhere, and everything is happening all the time. So let's do a little icebreaker. Now that we're at the last session and you've had some time to get to maybe speak up a little bit and feel comfortable with each other, if you are feeling up for it, please share in the chat box where you're from. Maybe it's where you're from originally, or maybe you want to share with us where you're living now. Maybe we want to share with us what you're teaching, what level you're teaching. Maybe it's, what city you're teaching in, whatever you feel comfortable with. And go ahead and fill that into the chat box. New Orleans, yay, K5. And while you're learning about each other in the chat box, I'll tell you a little bit about myself as well. I used to teach elementary general music in many different contexts. Suburban, and urban, religious, private schools, public schools, community centers, as outreach, as they sometimes call it. I conducted a community youth orchestra for Vietnamese American children. And in each setting, which is, each setting was so different, right? So I tweaked my lessons and I tailored them to the audience of students that I had according to the educational context and the students' backgrounds. And I've been successful in some ways and unsuccessful in other ways, right? It's a trial and error to get to the point at which you can really understand your students, what they respond to well. And of course, what parents and administration responds to well as well. So let's take a look here. We have, I'm going back up here. Jason's in North Carolina, or grew up in North Carolina, now is in New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Becky, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. So you're in that same area and are related to each other in a very special way. And then Amberlyn in Vancouver. Okay, great. And then Miguel, of course. So I think, Miguel, you're probably like 10 minutes away from me right now. Gabby, Montreal, McGill, yes. And field placements, yeah. And after school community music programs, K-12. Yes, Maurice, Maryland, and Katrina in Texas. So we have a pretty good, well-balanced representation of around the nation, right? Lisa's from in LA, and Frank, Philadelphia and Boston and New Jersey. Okay. And every level. Hey, congratulations on retirement. I think that deserves an applause. Maybe an unmuted applause. That's a big deal. So Ezra from Pennsylvania as well. Oh, and you were in Vegas. Great. Prince George's County, and right next to Washington, D.C. Okay. And Chrissy is outside of Chicago, and also was in Los Angeles, which is where most of us researchers met each other, actually. And then Early is from Los Angeles, and teaching world music ensembles and jazz bands in Silicon Valley. Absolutely fantastic. I miss California. I'm from California, Southern California. And so, but I don't miss the heat. So enjoy that, enjoy all of that. Sometimes I miss the heat when it's raining really hard. Okay, and Liz, Maryland and California, both coasts. So here we are, polycultural, polymusical. community involvement, cultural scaffolding, multifaceted and non-additive, notation and oral learning. These are all things that we consider when we're thinking about holistic and comparative lessons. Okay. And holistic and comparative, what do we mean by that? When we're talking about holistic, we mean balanced lessons and curriculum. We're talking about students and community members and the teacher are all part of the teaching and learning process, right? That's what we mean by student-centered rather than teacher-centered. It is that many people are involved in the learning and teaching process. And what do we mean by comparative? Comparative is the act of comparing characteristics of musics, different types of music, different genres of music of different cultures in a way that equalizes them. And of course, we might say that equality is kind of a strange thing to think about when you're thinking about comparing different genres of music, because you can't say they're equal, but they each have distinctive characteristics. But more so the idea that we do not want to prioritize or put on a platform Western art music, prioritize that over all others, right? We want to equalize them. Explore the interconnectedness of different musics and their contexts. How are different musical cultures and genres related to each other? How do they influence each other? And then also understand how different musical traditions inform each other. And this is something that Hess talks about, and that's why I have that citation down there, is that the idea that different musics can inform each other. That from learning about one kind of cultural musical culture, you can learn about how that came to be, what influenced it. And we might say one example that comes from Hess is the West African music and how that influenced samba. And then many connections of popular styles to Africa, right? Many things, many different musical styles go back to Africa. So, learning more about that and understanding the ways in which the world is connected and how music is connected to the world is connected to each other through music. And so let's take a look first at polycultural and polymusical as far as when we're thinking about holistic and comparative lessons. So you've seen Anuja Kamat already earlier today, and this is episode 18. She has a whole series of YouTube videos. And in this particular episode, she brings in her twin sister, which is pretty cool. And she talks about Indian music, and then her sister talks about Western music. And so they do this to compare the different styles. They talk about harmony, melody and harmony. They talk about vocal techniques. They talk about the differences between concert settings in Indian music and Western music, and then rhythmic elements as well. But today we're just going to watch a little excerpt. I chose vocal techniques because it's very interesting the way the two different vocal techniques are and how she describes them. So while you're watching the video, I want you to think about the tone of voice in which they present the information as teachers, the order in which Anuja presents the information, and then how she describes Western music. Okay, and then we can talk about your observations after we watch this. So remembering here on the side that her disclaimer is that Indian music, when she says that, she was referring to Indian classical music, which includes Hindustani and Carnatic, and Western music, she refers to Western classical music.
In Indian music, the singer is supposed to sing in a very full-throated manner. Apart from this, the singer is expected to sing in 3 octaves to be very fluent with his flow in the 3 octaves. That is, he has to be able to sing from the lower p to the upper g. Also, theoretically speaking, the singer is not really supposed to make use of the false voice or falsetto. This is a very airy kind of voice which one can use while singing, but in classical music you are forbidden to use such a voice. To give you a demonstration of how a full-throated versus a falsetto sounds, um, probably I'll sing the higher notes, in which the false voice is mostly used by many singers. So a full-throated higher note will sound something like this. A falsetto voice with the same notes will sound something like this. So you observed how the falsetto was actually a very light and airy and hollow kind of a voice, but fortunately or unfortunately, it's not allowed in Indian classical music. Now let us move on to know the Western vocal techniques. In Western music, there is a belief that each person has a specific kind of voice. So they have a particular range in which they are comfortable. Some people have a low pitched voice, some people have a high pitched voice. So, accordingly, they have a particular territory in which they operate. They do not need to move all along the three octaves and hit the notes from the three octaves. They can just operate in their territory. So there are four important types of voices from low to high pitch. It is bass, tenor, alto, and soprano. Generally, bass and tenor are male voices, and alto and soprano are female voices. In Western music, a lot of false voice or falsetto is used. Also, while they apply a note, in Indian music, they apply it plainly, while in Western music, they will apply the note and in the end they will add something called as vibrato. Vibrato is nothing but a wavy vibration that is given to the note as you sustain it. So if an Indian classical singer has to sing a note, he'll sing it like this. Ah. But if a Western classical singer has to sing it, he will add the vibrato. Ah. Now let us understand how the setting of an Indian classical.
All right. So tell me what you observed. Let's start with the tone of their voices, the two sisters' voices. In what way do you feel their voices were communicating? What I'm getting at is it, let's say, the tone of her speaking voice, as an informational way? Is it authoritative? Is it sharing? Is it, what is the mood that you get when you're watching this video?
I think my students would like it. I mean, they live on YouTube anyway, so every time, oh, YouTube. And they would probably all shout out because I teach like little kids, and we do not presently have any Indian families in our school. Most of my kids are from like Central America and some from Africa and the United States. But they would probably go, oh, where is she from? Like they're interested in other cultures and like other people's accents and the way they sound. But I think that she speaks very clearly, like the kids would be able to understand her.
So yeah, so if you were to show this to kids, yeah, they might first notice her accent, right? But she speaks very clearly. I'm also noticing in the chat box that Miguel says it sounds like informative sharing, that she's just kind of telling you. He doesn't feel like he's being talked at, but someone who's just excited to share what they like. Katrina wrote, hi Katrina, thanks for joining us. That it sounds inclusively accepting. Okay. And what I noticed about these are that they're very, both of the speakers are just informing you, right? In no way do they have a tone of voice that, or even the choice of words that they use. In no way do they prioritize one kind of style of vocal technique over another. They don't say that one is better than the other. or the one that is the right way or preferred, right? Anuja says, well, in Indian classical, we're not supposed to sing in a certain way. Insinuating that this is just like, this is the way that the vocal sound is supposed to be in Indian music. Not that it's better or worse. And at one point she says, fortunately or unfortunately. And I think that what she intends to say is that it's just different. That one is not better than the other, that they're just different. And then at one point, her sister, I think, says that in Western traditions, the belief is that there are different ranges of voices, right? So she approaches it as there's a practice that people who practice Western European classical music have a system in which they practice and believe in. But in a way, it insinuates that Indian classical music doesn't fall by those same rules, that they don't hold those same vocal technique beliefs necessarily. All right, so Sarah's saying, I'm not saying that one sounds better or worse, just judgmental. And I think that's a good way of putting it. And so the tone, I think that is what, if I could word that question better from the beginning, but I think you understand now what I was trying to get at is that, yeah, the tone is non-judgmental. Something that I greatly appreciate and think about when I'm trying to describe musics of different cultures, right? There's an element of discovery, Chrissy says. And Ezra, just like how some other cultures prefer a nasal sound, and Western music doesn't prefer that sound. Not bad, just different, right? And so you may get or may have seen, or maybe even have taught yourself, because I used to teach myself light head voice and all these wonderful things, right? Children should sing in a light head voice, and otherwise they're going to damage their voices. But then there's so many other different styles of singing that you learn about, and people aren't damaging their voices, right? If you learn how to use your technique properly, right? So there's that idea there. So I just wanted to share this kind of way that they're teaching this lesson, that it's not just about the content, the characteristics that they're comparing, but also the way in which they're speaking about the music. And Becky says, that was my first thought, reverting back to my classical Western training. Yes. All right. So thank you for sharing. And let's think about the fact that when you're teaching a lesson, the examples that you might pull or the lessons that you might teach might fulfill, thinking about the quadrants, right? They might fulfill one or more parts of the quadrant. So it's not like I'm just going to fulfill this one part of the quadrant, but maybe your lesson hits several things, right? Maybe it's about you have informed choices and your lesson is holistic, and maybe it's comparative, and you're doing your best to be an authentic, bring authentic lessons to the students, right? And sometimes maybe you're hitting one quadrant, and that's okay too, because like Jason said yesterday, the process that you want to think about is like the long-term process, what your end goal is, maybe over a long period of time. It could be years, right, to build up to this. So and I say that because we're taking a look at when you're thinking big term, you want long term, thinking of the big picture, you want to think backwards perhaps. What do I want my students to understand about the world, culture, about their lives, and the roles that they can play in change making through music? Also thinking about relevance. How will I integrate musics of different cultures in a way that's relevant to students' lived experiences? Because you could show Anuja Kamat's video, but you could also have a group of students who don't feel like they have a connection to that, right? So where is the connection to them? And how can you get them excited and understanding how this might be related to them, or how this might be useful for them? student-centered. Of course, what musical cultures do students want to share with me? So you might want to share some things with them, but also they want to share some things with you, right? And we've already seen in the chat box in the last couple of days, different ways that you center your students, having them create DJ playlists or having them have a say in what it is that they're interested in. And then also scaffolding. And this is, we're talking about cultural scaffolding. So what kind of cultural scaffolding do I need to set up before I present them with something? Where are my students in terms of cultural sensitivity and competence, and ready to, explore a certain type of cultural music? And what kind of steps do I need to set up in order to get to them to be successful with this, and accepting and understanding, have cultural compassion, and then ultimately have cultural competence. So you might have a homogenous group that sees and understands and lives culture in one particular way. And maybe they understand life through the movies they've watched. Maybe they can only connect so far before something that is presented to them could potentially come off as exotic. Perhaps they don't have the skills yet to decipher nuanced understanding. So you have to guide them toward that. But sometimes the young ones don't understand their own stated observations and actions. And they may make statements that could be potentially racist. Right? So you want to guide them toward understanding what that statement means. So I have a story for you. I had a young second grader years ago when I was teaching elementary general, a Middle Eastern culture, and was born and raised in the US. And I introduced an Indian song with the students. And there was a video that went along with it, really animated, fun song. We got in a circle and did all this stuff. And when I showed them the video, this particular student said, "Oh, their eyes are so slanted." And he made fun of them, and he pulled the corners of his eyes up, and he started laughing. And so that's a moment where it's like, okay, how do I respond to this? How will I integrate musics of different cultures, but also help students understand, right? There's like a big leap there between introducing a different culture to students and then their understandings of it, depending on their developmental stages and their ages, right? So I had about maybe 5 seconds. You know how it is, right? You got about 5 seconds to react. So I want to know what you would say if you had a situation like that. Go ahead and think about it for a minute, and if you need, and then go ahead and type in the chat box how you would respond to this second grader who made fun of an animated video of Indian children whose eyes he said were slanted. And when you're ready, go ahead and share that in the chat box.
I see Becky's hand is up as well.
Oh, thank you, Chrissy. No Becky, problem. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to write this exactly. That reminded me of a situation I had during the first year of the pandemic when we were shut down. And I had twin boys whose families were from India, and they expressed hatred of Chinese people. And they were in first grade, and I thought, where is this coming from? And I kind of said to them, it was all through Zoom and email and all that stuff, which was even another layer, for first graders. But I said, well, why do you feel that way? Why would you say something like that? Because, you wouldn't want someone to say that about you, and that's unfair. And so they expressed their frustration with not being able to be in school because of the virus, and they knew the virus was Chinese. And I thought, okay, I know they're hearing things at home, they're hearing things, on the news or whatever. And I kind of asked, admins to step in at that point and say, like, I just wanted to make you aware of this. And I contacted the parents. Like, I understand your frustration. I completely agree with your frustration, but you can't take that out on a group of people or a specific person, or, we're going through these events right now that are causing long-term trauma, and this was the only way they could express that. So I'm not going to immediately jump at a kid and say, well, you can't say that. But to meet that sort of shock with, understanding, but also firmness, saying, that's not acceptable. And how would you feel? And trying to place it back on, making them understanding the larger world and the community around them.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, your own story, and also how you reacted as well. So I'm going to look over at the chat box now, and catch up over here. Amberlyn.
Ezra also has his hand raised after the chat.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Ezra. Oh my, did you know that lots of people throughout the world have eyes like that and haven't been made fun for it? And making fun of someone's eyes can make them feel really bad. I don't think you would like making people feel bad, would you? Yeah, and that's along the lines of how I responded as well. And Miguel says, come at it from an understanding and learning opportunity. Maybe even bring out a book about different cultures and say you're going to meet people that look different than you, and that's okay. Just remember to be kind and accepting, curious but not judgmental. And I was also thinking about those magical 4 words that Christy mentioned yesterday: curious but not judgmental, right? And I really appreciate Becky's words of like, how did you come to think of that? Like, how did you come to that thought process? Trying to understand where they have this idea, where it stems from, especially for young children, right? Because sometimes it's kind of shocking. You hear a statement like that and you're like, wait, but you're 6. Or you're 7, like, where'd you get this? Evelyn says, our classroom motto in learning was get curious. I love that. We talked about how it can be a natural feeling to giggle when we see something that is new and different. Yes. When you notice yourself having that feeling, you know it's time to get curious. That's such a positive way to approach that. And Ezra says we should never make fun of something that someone can't control, because that's not fair. Yeah. Ezra, did you want to expand on that?
I mean, at my school, we have 2 big problems, and like you said, they're hearing things at home. I have like a 96% Hispanic population, and then a small African American population, some of whom are actually from Africa, and some who have grown up here. And we've had several like arguments in class just over games or disagreements. Kids fight, but like a lot of times the Hispanic kids, like their parents tell them they're white. So like they'll go to the African American kid, well, you're black. Whoa, bro. Like, we're going to stop everything right now. Like that just can't happen.
Yeah.
It can't happen. So then we talk about, how would you feel if, like you said, how would you feel if someone, like a person that looked like me, I would never do this, but how would you feel if a police officer, or how would you feel if another teacher treated you the way you just treated them? Well, that wouldn't be okay. All right, well, then you can't do it either. I like, my favorite thing I say all the time, because they're always, why? If I can't do it, you can't do it. I have to wear clothes, you have to wear clothes. I can't say the F word, you can't say the F word. It literally works for everything.
Yeah. And
if you're not allowed to do it, they can't do
it. Yes. And also it does bring a different lens to what holistic means, right? Because when we teach music, it really isn't just about the music, is it ever, right? It's about culture, and it's about the way kids interact and the things that they say, and how we deal with that. So it's really more than music, but it's really about the whole human being. And then that it takes the teacher and the student and the community to help students develop cultural sensitivity, cultural competence. And we do it through music. So I showed you Anuja Kamat's video, and if we were just looking at that, you might say, okay, that's like world music. It's world music pedagogy. And we're just looking at music of different cultures, right? Which we are, and it is, in a sense, like world music pedagogy. We're listening and we're learning, and maybe we try it out. But the next step would be to engage the students in issues that they face, helping them become critical thinkers about what they're seeing. And so cultural appreciation is just the first part. So yeah, if you showed an Anuja Kamat video, and just talked about the music and itself and the musical practices. Yeah, that's world music pedagogy, and it can be culturally responsive too, if you take the next step. So we talk about how oftentimes that socio-political, the critical consciousness is missing from the piece, because you could have, for instance, students performing songs from different cultures, or diverse programming, but that is missing something, right? It's missing a deeper meaning, the connection to maybe why the artist wrote that, or what was the historical context. Did they write it as a piece of protest? Was it something that they were dealing with internally? Was it were they dealing with identity? And I'm thinking just off the top of my head, like Tchaikovsky, for instance. There's so much more to say about Tchaikovsky than just that his music was became very well known. So just thinking about that, when you're thinking about culturally responsive teaching, the difference between like multicultural or world music pedagogy or world music education, and what makes that different from culturally responsive teaching. Where is that point where it becomes culturally responsive? So the next part we'll talk about in the holistic and comparative lessons is community involvement. Of course, we've talked several times in the chat box and in other conversation sessions about collaborating with culture bearers, bringing culture bearers in, and your parents might be culture bearers, right? Parents of your students and maybe community members. Some parents may not be necessarily the best culture bearers. So just because a parent is of a certain ethnicity and you want to bring someone in doesn't mean that they know about the music of their own culture even, actually, or that they're willing to share. Maybe they may be shy. And so, there's a certain kind of, you have to sort of sense how comfortable a parent is with sharing and how much they know and are willing to share. You might ask, what kind of songs did you sing? I would love for you to share, the kind of songs that you sing with your kids at home. And that question might be not necessarily like a question that they can answer, because they might say, well, I work hard and I don't really have time to like sing with my kids. So that will bring up different issues. So the way that you approach parents and the way that you ask questions is really important as far as when you're asking people to be culture bearers. But some people are willing professional culture bearers who love to do it, right? You might find them at nonprofit organizations. Here locally in Tacoma, the Asia Pacific Cultural Center, which supports businesses and arts and culture of all different Asian Pacific Islander communities. And so you might go to an organization like that who have great resources for people who are willing to and are experts of art, culture, music. Administrative support, of course, and someone had mentioned before, if you're bringing in a culture bearer, it's fantastic to get administrative support and also to get them to see the bigger picture. It's not just for your music class, but it's really for all the students, because all the students kind of, if you're in general music, at least they all go through you, right? So, so it's really for the whole school body. It's not just for your music class. So help them see that. One example is a virtual cultural exchange with students from a different country. And this is something that someone came to me to ask about. They had paired up with, this is a teacher on the East Coast, had paired up with a classroom in Hanoi, Vietnam. And they were asking me about just, general cultural practices and etiquette, and asking about different songs that might be appropriate to learn. And so we had talked about that, but the process was that the teacher and the two teachers from the two classes had their students have online meetings and then made videos to introduce themselves and what they liked, just general like kids stuff, like, oh, this is what we eat, and this is my favorite food, and this is what our classroom looks like, and this is the front of our school building. And it was eye-opening because everything was so different from the two different classrooms. And then they chose songs, and then they learned each other's songs. So the East Coast teachers classroom learned 2 Vietnamese songs. And then this is 5th grade. And then in Vietnam, they chose some English songs with the guidance, English language songs from the guidance of the music teacher on the East Coast. And then at the end of learning these songs, they performed them for each other online. So that's one way of cultural sharing and understanding more about the world, right? You have the local resources, but then you also, now, of course, with technology, how great it is, you can reach out to people from across the world. And another example of bringing in culture bearers is, for instance, I saw someone in the chat box was interested in creating a community music group. And so we have a colleague who started a mariachi band with his students and brought in culture bearers to teach the students, but also to teach himself. Because even though he may be of Latino heritage, he actually did not know anything about mariachi. So there are, also nuances there. Just because a person may identify as a certain culture doesn't mean that they know everything about, musically about that culture. So he was a music teacher, had no idea, but wanted to start a community group because he knew that the students in the community really liked this specific ensemble style of playing. And so he learned everything from the ground up, and from how to play to what instruments you need, where you get them, what kind of outfits you need. So it's a big success. He's very proud of it. And yes, it takes a lot of work, and it's a long-term project, right? Building over several years. But the impact on the community is incredible because they're connecting with each other, right? And it's important to the community, it's important to the kids, and you're really reflecting that through the schools that the kids are in. Okay, toward a holistic sense of culture, go on field trips, get an idea of what the culture is all about, not just the song, not just a song from the culture, right? Or not just the music even of a culture, but what is the culture like as a whole? Maybe partner with other teachers of subject areas. You can talk about not just the music, but also the art, or maybe the history, social studies teachers, right? Go to museums if you can, alone to help your own understanding, or if you can take students with you. So I just named a couple here, the California African American Museum and the Grammy Museum, full of musical artists and histories and exhibits. In Seattle, the Museum of Pop Culture. Right now, Mopop has an exhibit on hip hop, and it's a really great exhibit, so I would encourage you to go if you're in the area. And there's also an exhibit on Afrofuturism at Mopop right now too, so that would be interesting to just learn more about a different culture. And also sign up for community newsletters, and that's how you find out what's going on in the community, because sometimes we kind of get in our own bubble and we just do the things that we know how to do, and talk to the people that we know. But by stepping out and just signing up to find out what is going on outside of my own bubble will help you find those temporary exhibits, those local performances. So getting into kind of getting your feet and your fingers into the neighborhoods and the communities around you. I'm looking at the chat box, and Chrissy has suggested here the Musical Instrument Museum in Scottsdale, Arizona has some educator resources. Thanks for sharing that. So speaking of community resources, I'm going to say, instead of taking 5 minutes, maybe a couple of minutes, because we're just, because of the time restriction that we're on, but also you already have some resources in mind that you've been wanting to but haven't gotten to yet, those are things that you can also share with us. Think about nonprofit organizations or a person that you've been meaning to reach out to, a museum that's near you, a local band maybe that you've heard about, that's a specific type of ensemble that might enrich your own classroom teaching. Type that into the chat box. What is it that you want to explore more of, thinking about this coming year? And if you're interested, go ahead and raise your hand and then just tell us about what that resource is, how it could help you this coming year.
Tina, can I interject real quick?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you don't want to share some of the resources that for this session, we do have a form that you can fill out. Just kind of put some resources there that we can share out with everyone at the end, just so we have a list of things. I went ahead and put that link in the chat. Thank you for bringing that up, Tina.
Yeah, thank you, Liz, for putting that into the chat. So Ezra writes, my students want to experience a symphony, so I'll be taking them to one. That's great. Symphony field trip. All right. Oh, there's a resource again. Thanks, Shannon, for putting that in there. Just take a couple minutes and it'll be interesting to hear what your ideas are and what your resources are local to you. All right, if you have some resources that you've been thinking about, go ahead and drop them in the chat box. Or you can raise your hand if you'd like to share about them as well. Okay, the Smithsonian National African American Heritage Museum has an entire floor dedicated to music. That is awesome. Little Kids Rock, yes, early, has many resources, including music from different cultures. I feel like Little Kids Rock has just so much stuff. It's just seemingly endless. Every time I go on Little Kids Rock, their website, there's something new there, and there's just so much to learn. So that's an incredible resource. Brian will be considering the issue of local environmental justice in one of my classes. Excellent. So I'm finding a local organization that's focused on that. That's fantastic to bridge different areas, right? And this kind of interdisciplinary approach to music. Okay, and also, Brian, it's a very concrete way of being able to make change through music when we're talking about environment and focusing with, pairing with organizations and what can you do, like what is the action. So that's great. And then also in Nashville, Tennessee, Liz writes, the National Museum of African American Music as well just opened recently last year. That's fantastic. So many different things. And I would say myself that we've got, local museums here that it's one of those things I've been meaning to get out to see how it might enrich my own teaching. And then I don't do it, right? So that might be one thing where it's like, okay, here's my sort of scholarly New Year's resolution in September. Like I need to get out and do that at some point because I know it's going to help me. Teachrock.org, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. So let's go into cultural scaffolding a little bit here. We have different types of students, right? Some of your students may need heavier scaffolding as far as cultural competence and getting to that certain point, like we talked about before, and some of them may not need it. But for students or classes that may need heavy scaffolding, here are a couple of points. Create an environment and classroom culture of discussion from the beginning of the year. Because if you're just performing all year and then suddenly in March, you're like, let's talk about, something, your students are not going to talk because they're not used to talking in their performance class, right? They're used to being told what to do, or they're used to be playing their instrument and not talking at all for 50 minutes, right? So it's going to be like very awkward. So you might have instead create the culture of talking in your classroom early on so that it becomes normal, so that by the time you're in November or February or March, that when you have them turn into small groups and maybe do a project or even just turn to a partner and say something, that it's not just awkward silence. So We also have use intentionally worded guiding questions. So help students out by asking those questions. Try out different questions, because you might ask a question and then it didn't quite work the way you wanted it, or you didn't get the answers you wanted, or it was unclear. So then you can go back and think, oh, how could I have worded that question better? Model the thought process and go through the process as a whole class with the students. So you might be the one to model your discovery of a culture, and then you take the students on that journey with you, so that they are not feeling exposed, but yet that you're showing them what it's like to explore something else and to learn and be curious and ask questions, instead of making judgments or stereotype, whatever, right? Because if you are creating a lesson and it starts at a certain point and you let them go, they might not be prepared to, they might not be sure of what you want them to do. So, okay, so we listen to music of different cultures, and I talk about maybe music of my culture, and I like it, but I'm not really sure why I like a certain type of music. Like, they don't have the vocabulary or maybe the thought process. So high scaffolding, model it all for them. Do it as a whole class before you get them into groups, pairs. Then start with examples that are closely related to students' lived experiences. If it's too far away from what they're understanding, then like I said earlier, that word, it's just too different. It's exotic. It's not relatable. So start with something that's relatable, maybe something that's different but relatable, and then move your process forward or further away from their cultural understandings. And then start with yourself as an expert of another musical culture. That's another way. If you are really into a specific kind of, say, musical genre that you're not teaching in class, you might be the one. And I remember someone saying earlier, like, I love this particular genre of music, and I want to share it with you. And it's okay to share this kind of music in class. Like, we don't have to do classical music all the time, right? For you to model that you love this, and that it's okay to talk about, that it's okay to play, that it's okay to listen to, you can help students open up as well. I think sometimes, maybe not all the time, but sometimes, especially historically, students may have just not talked about the kind of music that they listen to outside of class, because they maybe thought, well, that's not what we're doing, or that I'm not allowed to talk about that, or that's what we do in school. For myself, I was in a Vietnamese cover band, like Vietnamese pop music, played the saxophone, but no one knew that when I was in college, because I just didn't, it was related to what I was doing, and no one would care. It wasn't interesting. It wasn't remotely related to like classical flute, which was what I was studying at the school. But maybe if someone knew that I did that, like, my opportunities would have opened up, or people would have seen me as someone who was a more well-rounded musician, and maybe I would have had more opportunities for different collaborations or something, right? So just having a space for students to share all of their musical interests and make it okay to talk about, that is something that may open up new doors. Also, my high school band director didn't know that I played the piano until like May of my year. He's like, oh, I had no idea. And the only reason why he knew is because we had a substitute one day, and the sub let us do whatever we wanted. So I got on the piano and I played Debussy's Clair de Lune, and he was like, wow. And then he told my band teacher. And then my band teacher came back the next day and was like, you play the piano? I was like, yeah, I guess, I don't know. I just never told you, like, you never asked, that I have like a whole nother musical like life, outside of school. So there's so much, that you may or may not know about your students. All right, so here's this song. Now I'm going from a heavy scaffolding to less scaffolding. So this is an example of a student who I kind of let go on his own. He's about maybe 18 or 19 at the time. And he loved this particular song. So his project was to just learn about the history of this song. And this is one way to get students to understand historical context of music that they're studying or music that they love. And so you can highly scaffold it and go along the ride with your students, or you can just let them go and have them learn it about it by themselves. They might discover very interesting origins. They may discover that a song was originally an African slave song, but is now this very popular song that, you know, people did not know about at all, about its historical origins. In this particular case, my student loved to skate to this song. And so he decided that he said he'd put it on repeat all the time and he wanted to learn more about it. And so he was listening at the time to this version by the Bridge City Sinners. And the lyrics of this version that band sang is here. It's about a woman who dies. So let's take a look at a few a clip of this song performed by Bridge City Sinners.
Well, I went down to St. James Infirmary and I saw my baby there. She was laid out on that long white table, so sweet, so cold, so fair. Well, I went up to see the doctor. She's feeling very low, he said. When I went back to see my baby, and good God, she was lying there dead. So let her go, God bless her soul. Wherever she may be, she may search this whole wide world over and never find a motherfucker like me.
Okay, so that's a little clip of that song there. So he came to find out that there were dozens of iterations of this song. And he kept going further and further back. He kind of went down the rabbit hole to his delight and found that its origins were the first recorded moment of this song and lyrics also that were written down were in 1848 in Ireland. The song traveled to England and then eventually to the United States. And it went under the several different names. Actually, the album cover and the album of a compilation of versions of this song is on Smithsonian Folkways. Louis Armstrong has done it. Duke Ellington has done a version of this song. And so through his journey, he discovered how the song lyrics changed to reflect the current events of the time. But originally, it was about a man who dies from a venereal disease. And I think he probably got a really big kick out of that, being like kind of an 18, 19-year-old male, just like, you know, you can kind of see he's kind of gritty. He likes to do all these, he likes to skate. He likes this type of music. He also loved, just a huge fan of punk, but then it really expanded his circle of different genres of music that this particular song went through, different iterations and the different historical moments that this song went through. And so it really expanded his appreciation of the song and his understanding of how music evolves over time. He also became confident in his own skills to research because I gave him very little scaffolding. And he was able to back up his opinion, and he had much more to say about why he liked the song rather than I love this song, I skate to it, and I just put it on repeat, and I love this band too, right? He was able to talk in depth about understanding the context of music, of this music, and how it has served society's needs in different moments in history. So when you're thinking about lessons and what you want students to achieve, right? I would say he was able to show student achievement academically, a cultural consciousness, and understanding of the role that music plays throughout time. in different societies and cultures. Now, I would also say that when you are making lessons, make sure to give students multiple ways to respond that will work with everyone's preference. So you might have students who are really into discussion, but you might have people who don't like to talk, right? People who are shy or introverted maybe, and so they prefer writing in a journal. Maybe they don't even like to be identified. So you might have a box for anonymous comments or anonymous thoughts of what they like or the thoughts about class, right? And not everybody has to do everything, but maybe you let them use their method of communication with you, and what feels to them. Okay, another way of reaching out to students. And something else that I did was I had playground duty when I was teaching elementary school, which at first I really didn't like because I was like, I just want to teach music. But after a while, I found that, seeing kids on the playground is a totally different experience as far as observing them play and who they play with. But then they would come up to me and talk, and we would casually talk. And because I was on their ground, like I was on their turf, they would talk to me about different things. It was like I wasn't really the center anymore, right? So they would tell me about their lives and what songs they liked. And it was actually because of me being on the playground that these two students came up to me and asked me if they could write a song. And so that song ended up being in our concert. And, you just different ways of communicating with students and get to know them in different places, outside of the classroom is a good way to really understand your students. All right, so we also have here multifaceted and non-additive lessons. What does that mean? Additive, what does that mean? When I'm saying additive, I mean sprinkling ethnic, multicultural, or world music into a curriculum with minimal contextual reference while centering Western art music. The additive approach is like being a tourist or an explorer, where you go to different things or different cities for like a day or two, but you really don't get in depth. So it's really, an explorer who embraces breadth rather than depth. But if you're going to be culturally responsive, you really do need to go deep. Just like Jason said yesterday, it has to be a depth process of going deep. A non-additive approach will strive to respect and understand cultural context of a musical piece and its composer and artist. And a non-additive approach also strives toward a performance with authenticity and in equal standing to other cultural musics, including Western art music. So you see that you can kind of envision that framework, the circle. They're all kind of connected, aren't they? In different ways. We have authenticity and also thinking about the choice that you make, informed choices. And now for notation and oral learning. I have an example for you here. This piece was taught to, this is a college, this is the USC concert choir, was taught to the students sheet music, but there was also input from the composer and his wife who came to visit. And the wife especially was like trying to show us how to sing this piece, because there were certain nuanced vocalizations that you could not put on paper. And so she was telling us, no, it needs to be more nasal. Like it has to sound more strident, like bright. It needs to be brighter. It needs to be pressing. It needs to be more urgent. So I'll play this excerpt for you of that section where she was trying to help us out with the tone that they were looking for. And this is in the soprano altos. Yeah, pause there. So I would say she kept trying to get it more nasal. It needs to be more nasal. And I would say we were kind of successful, but I bet that, we kept falling back into that Western choir, like choral sound. It was really hard to get out of that space. So, just the challenges, the realities, the challenges of trying to sing in different styles, right? Is there, but I wouldn't say it was a failure. We were more strident, we were more nasal. And I think we maybe met her halfway. But the point being that that first there's notation, but there's also oral learning involved, right? There's certain things that you just don't see on paper. Second, that we had a culture bearer come to us and show us how it was supposed to be done. Unfortunately, it was the composer himself, so that was great, and his wife. And then third, that, sometimes you try to get your students to do it and maybe they're not completely successful, but they tried, right? And maybe they're half successful, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect 100%, right? It doesn't have to be. And it could still be a good performance, and they could still have learned a lot. So what we learned about in this song, and I say we because I was in the choir, but I hope you can't see me because that's a much different, younger version of me, is as that they learned about the context of the piece. So the composer came and talked about what the song was about. It's in the language of Catalan. It is influenced by African and Indian expressions, Tibetan monk songs, Buddhist mantras. This piece was written in response to a flood in Venezuela that ravaged the land and killed over 25,000 civilians and left more than 400,000 people homeless. So there's a lot to talk about in this song, right? Rather than just performing it and just trying to get the sounds right. There's so much to this context. And because we found out the story about this, we performed it with vigor and meaning, right? So this kind of context setting, along with intentional coaching of pronunciation, written notation, oral learning of these indigenous sounds that Western notation couldn't capture, really helped. It would make for a holistic kind of experience and understanding of the piece. So, discuss what's culturally appropriate, style, interpretation, find someone if you don't know, right? Set a foundation for an immersive learning experience, and then try your best to have an authentic performance. So these separate examples that I've shown you from various lessons or ideas of lessons all try to hit Gloria Ladson Billings' 3 tenets in culturally responsive teaching. Student achievement, right? Do your best, achieve. Socio-political action, what do you do about it? And these are the issues that faced this composer at the time. He wanted to respond in some way to this horrific climate act, right? And cultural consciousness, know more about cultures other than your own. All right, if you have any comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat box here before we take a quick little break. Just let me know what your thoughts are on these, perhaps any of these examples that you wanted to share your thoughts. If you had some thoughts that you haven't had a chance to share yet, and I'll stop share right now.